The moment that changed everything did not happen during an argument. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no warning at all. It happened quietly on a Monday morning while the house was still half asleep. I was standing in my kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, waiting for the kettle to boil. The window above the sink was fogged from the rain outside, and the sound of water tapping against the glass filled the silence. It was the kind of morning I had lived 1,000 times before, slow, predictable, safe. I reached for my phone to check the time. That was when I saw the message. It was from my son. Just one line. Do not come by today. We need space. At first, I did not understand what I was reading. I blinked, adjusted my glasses, and read it again. The words did not change. Do not come by today. I stood there holding the phone, the kettle screaming behind me, completely forgotten. My first thought was that something had happened, that someone was sick, that there had been an emergency. I typed back immediately. Is everything okay? The reply came almost at once. Yes, we just need some distance right now. Distance. The word felt strange coming from him. My son had never used it with me before, not once in his 43 years of life. I turned off the kettle and sat down at the small kitchen table, the one my husband and I had eaten breakfast at every morning for decades. The chair creaked as I lowered myself into it. I remember noticing that sound, as if my mind was searching for something ordinary to hold on to. I stared at the phone, waiting for another message, an explanation, a joke, anything that made this make sense. Nothing came. My name is Eleanor. I am 70 years old. And until that morning, I believed that no matter what happened in life, my son would never shut me out. For most of my life, family had been the one thing I was certain about. Jobs changed, friends drifted away, my body slowed down, but family stayed. At least, that is what I told myself. After my husband passed away 6 years ago, my son became my routine. He checked in on me, fixed things around the house, helped me with paperwork when it overwhelmed me. He told me I was lucky, that not everyone had a child willing to help the way he did. I believed him. That morning, as I sat alone at the table, the rain still falling outside, I felt a quiet confusion settle over me. Not panic, not anger, confusion. Had I done something wrong? I replayed our last conversation in my head. We had talked 3 days earlier. He had sounded tired, but not upset. He had asked about my blood pressure, about my groceries, about whether I needed anything. Nothing about space, nothing about distance. I typed again. Did I do something? This time, the response took longer. A full minute passed, then 2. Finally, my phone vibrated. It is not about that. Please just respect our wishes. That word landed heavier than the rest. I placed the phone face down on the table and folded my hands in my lap. I could feel my heart beating, steady but slower than it should have been. The house felt too quiet all of a sudden, as if it were listening with me. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to give him time. But underneath that calm, something else stirred, a small, uncomfortable awareness that this was not just about a visit. I had planned to stop by his house that day to drop off paperwork, bank paperwork, the kind he had asked me to bring over so he could look it over for me. He had offered to help manage things after I forgot to pay one bill last winter. Just one. A mistake anyone could make. "You do not need to stress about these things anymore, Mom. Let me take care of it." That is what he had said. At the time, I felt relieved, grateful, proud even. I had raised a son who stepped up. Now, sitting alone in my kitchen, I wondered if that was the reason he did not want me to come by. I picked up my phone again and opened my banking app. Not because I was worried, not yet, just to reassure myself. The balance loaded slowly. When it appeared, my stomach tightened. The number was lower than I expected. Not empty, not alarming, just wrong. I told myself it was nothing, that perhaps a payment had gone through early, that I had simply forgotten. Still, I scrolled. There was a transfer I did not recognize. It was not labeled clearly, just a movement of money from one account to another, an account I could not see. I felt a faint heat rise in my chest. I closed the app and opened it again, as if doing so might correct the mistake. It did not. I sat very still, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. Each second felt louder than the last. I had trusted my son with access, limited access, he had said, just enough to help. I had not imagined I would ever need to question him. My phone buzzed again. A new message. "Please do not overthink this." That sentence, more than anything else, made my hands start to shake, because I had not told him what I was thinking, and somehow he already knew. I looked around my kitchen, at the familiar cabinets, the small crack in the corner of the ceiling, the place where my husband used to sit every morning reading the paper. This was my life, my home, my stability, and suddenly I felt like I was standing on something that had shifted without warning. I did not reply. Instead, I sat there, alone, realizing that the shock was not in being told to stay away. The shock was in understanding, for the first time, that I might not be in control of my own life anymore, and that whatever was happening had already begun long before that message ever reached my phone. When people ask how something like this happens, they usually imagine a single bad decision, one mistake, one moment where you should have known better. The truth is quieter than that. It happens slowly, kindly, wrapped in concern. Long before that morning in my kitchen, long before the message telling me to stay away, there was a different version of my son. Or maybe he was always the same, and I simply did not see it. I raised him alone for many years. His father worked long hours, and when he was home, he was tired. So the small moments belonged to me, packing lunches, helping with homework, sitting beside him on the couch when he could not sleep. I taught him how to tie his shoes at this very table. I remember his small fingers fumbling with the laces, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You will get it," I told him. "Just take your time." He smiled when he finally did. After my husband died, that smile became something I clung to. Grief changes the shape of your days. The house gets quieter, meals get smaller, Nights stretch longer than they used to. My son stepped into that space. At first, it felt like love. He called more often, stopped by without being asked, fixed the loose step on the porch, replaced light bulbs I could have changed myself but let him do anyway. It felt good to be needed. When I struggled with paperwork, he noticed. When I forgot an appointment, he reminded me gently. "You have been through a lot, Mom," he said once. "It is okay to lean on me." I believed him because I wanted to, because trusting him made the loneliness easier to bear. The first time money came up, it did not feel dangerous. I had mentioned that managing everything alone felt overwhelming. Taxes, utilities, insurance letters written in language that made my head ache. He offered to help. Not to take over, he was careful to say. Just to look, just to organize. We sat together at the dining room table one afternoon. Sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating stacks of envelopes between us. He sorted them neatly, explaining things in a calm voice. "This one is nothing," he said. "This one we can set up automatically so you do not have to worry." Automatic payments sounded like freedom, like relief. I signed where he pointed. I did not read every line. I trusted him. At first, nothing changed. Bills were paid. The lights stayed on. The house stayed mine. He started asking small questions. About accounts, about savings, about what I wanted to happen someday. "It is good to plan ahead," he said. "I just want to make sure you are protected." Protected, that word again. When I hesitated, he smiled. Not impatient, not angry, just concerned. "I worry about you being taken advantage of, Mom. There are so many scams targeting older people." I laughed at that, told him I was not that old, that I was still sharp. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me in a way I could not quite place. As time passed, his visits became more structured, less casual. He would arrive with a purpose, a form, a suggestion. He spoke more often about efficiency, about simplifying things, about making life easier. And each time I agreed, because nothing he asked felt unreasonable on its own. He did not take, he arranged. He did not demand, he offered. Looking back now, I can see the pattern, but at the time, it felt like care. Friends would comment on how lucky I was. "You raised a good son," they would say. I smiled and agreed. I never told anyone how small I sometimes felt during those conversations, how his tone shifted when I asked too many questions, how he would sigh just slightly, as if explaining things to me was exhausting. It was subtle, easy to dismiss. I told myself I was imagining it, that grief made people sensitive, that he was only trying to help. The balance of our relationship shifted without me noticing. Slowly, the decisions were no longer mine alone. He started saying things like, "Trust me, I have it handled." And I wanted to believe that handing things over was a sign of strength. That accepting help did not mean giving up control. But there is a difference between support and replacement. I did not see that difference until much later. By the time that message arrived telling me to stay away, the foundation had already been laid. Not with cruelty, with kindness. And that, I would learn, is what makes betrayal so hard to recognize until it is already too late. The first lie did not sound like a lie. That is the part that still unsettles me when I think about it. It sounded reasonable, thoughtful, even responsible. 2 days after the message telling me to stay away, I woke up early with a heavy feeling in my chest that would not go away. The house was quiet in that deep morning way before the world fully starts moving. I made coffee and sat at the table without turning on the light, letting the gray dawn fill the room. I told myself I would not check the bank again. I told myself I was overreacting, but my hands moved on their own. The balance was lower than it had been the day before. Not by much, just enough. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering as I scrolled. Another transfer had gone through overnight. The description was vague. Internal adjustment. Adjustment. It was such a gentle word for something that made my heart start to pound. I felt embarrassed for feeling suspicious. Mothers are not supposed to suspect their children. That thought alone felt disloyal. So I called him. He answered quickly this time, as if he had been expecting the call. "Mom," he said, already sounding tired. I asked him about the new transfer. I kept my voice calm. I did not accuse. I simply asked. There was a brief pause. Then he spoke. "I told you," he said. "I am reorganizing things. Some money needs to be in different places temporarily." "Where?" I asked. He laughed softly, the way he used to when I asked about things he thought were obvious. "You do not need to worry about that. It is all still yours." Still yours. I repeated the words in my head as he spoke. Then why can I not see it? Another pause. "Because it is part of a consolidated account," he said. "It is more efficient that way." I did not know what that meant. And he knew I did not know what that meant. I asked him to explain. He sighed, not loudly, not angrily, just enough to let me hear it. "Mom, I am doing this to help you. Do you really want to make things complicated?" Complicated. The word felt like a warning. I felt myself shrinking on the other end of the line. I hated that feeling. I hated how quickly it came back, like muscle memory from childhood. I told him I just wanted to understand. He softened then, his voice lowered. "You trust me, right?" That question stopped me cold. Trust should not have to be asked for like that. "Yes," I said, "because that is what mothers say." "Good," he replied. "Then let me do my job." After we hung up, I sat very still. I did not feel reassured. I felt dismissed. Later that afternoon, I went through my mail more carefully than usual. I noticed something I had not paid attention to before. The bank statements were no longer arriving at my house. At first, I thought they were simply delayed, but when I checked the online preferences, my stomach dropped. The mailing address had been changed, not to his home address, to a post office box. I stared at the screen, my heart beating hard in my ears. I did not remember approving this. I did not remember discussing it. I called him again. This time, he did not answer. I left a message. I tried not to sound upset. I asked about the address change. I asked why statements were no longer coming to me. He called back hours later. "Oh, that," he said quickly. "Paper mail just creates clutter. I did you a favor." A favor. I told him I wanted the statements sent back to my house. He hesitated. "That is unnecessary," he said. "Everything is already organized digitally." I told him I was not comfortable with that. His tone changed. "Mom, you are overthinking. This is exactly the kind of stress we were trying to avoid." There it was again. He said we should talk later, that he was busy, that he would explain everything soon. Soon never came. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. I replayed the conversations again and again, searching for reassurance I could not find. The lie was not in the words themselves. It was in what they were designed to do. They were meant to make me doubt my right to ask questions, to make me feel difficult, to make me step back. And somewhere in the quiet of that night, I realized something I had never considered before. If he had nothing to hide, there would be nothing to explain away. The next morning, I decided to do something I had not done since my husband was alive. I printed everything, every statement I could access, every transaction, every account summary. I spread them across the dining table, the paper overlapping like pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to complete. Patterns began to emerge, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Transfers timed carefully, always just under the amount that would trigger alerts. My hands shook as I traced the dates with my finger. This was not an organization. This was strategy. I heard his voice in my head, "Trust me," and for the first time, I understood the truth behind the lie. Trust had been used as a tool. And once I saw that, I knew there was no going back to the way things had been before. The eviction did not begin with a notice on my door. It began with a conversation that sounded almost kind. 3 mornings after I spread the papers across my dining table, my phone rang just after 9. I had not even finished my coffee. I remember because the mug was still warm in my hands when I answered. "Mom," he said, sounding careful, not rushed, not irritated, careful, like someone choosing words they had practiced. I asked him what was going on with my accounts. He did not answer that. Instead, he said, "We have been talking about your living situation." I did not respond right away. I waited, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to continue. "This house is a lot for one person," he said. "You know that. It is expensive to maintain. Property taxes, utilities, repairs. It might be time to think about something smaller." I looked around the kitchen while he spoke. The worn corner of the counter where my husband used to lean while telling stories. The small crack in the tile near the sink that had been there for decades. This house was not just square footage. It was my life. I told him I was not planning to move. There was a pause, a shift. "Well," he said, "that may not really be up to you anymore." Those words landed heavily in my chest. "What do you mean, not up to me?" He cleared his throat. "We are worried about your ability to manage things on your own, financially, practically. It would be safer for everyone if decisions were made collectively. Collectively. I felt a chill move through me. I asked him if he was saying I could not live in my own home. No, he said quickly. Not exactly. Just that it might be time to consider other arrangements, temporary ones. Temporary. That word meant nothing to me anymore. Later that afternoon, an envelope arrived by courier. Not regular mail, courier, like something official. Inside was a letter from a property management firm. It stated that, effective immediately, oversight of my home expenses would be transferred to an appointed representative. My representative. His name was listed. I sat down hard in the hallway chair, the paper shaking in my hands. I read the letter again, then again. It did not say eviction, but it said access. It said authority. It said decisions regarding maintenance, payments, and occupancy would be reviewed. Reviewed. I called him immediately. This time, he answered on the first ring. "What is this?" I asked, holding the letter, even though he could not see it. He sighed, like someone exhausted by resistance. "This is just a precaution. You are not being evicted. Do not be dramatic. Do not be dramatic." I asked him who gave permission for this. "You did," he said. My heart started to race. When you signed the documents last year, I told him I had not signed anything giving him authority over my home. He told me to check the file drawer where I kept old paperwork. I did. At the very bottom, under insurance forms and tax records, was a document I barely remembered. A general authorization. I remembered signing it after my husband died. He had told me it was for emergencies, in case something happened to me. I had not read the fine print. Now I did. It gave him limited authority over financial matters tied to property upkeep. Limited, but limits can be stretched. I felt sick. The next morning, 2 men showed up at my door. One wore a polo shirt with the logo from the management company. The other carried a clipboard. They were polite, uncomfortably polite. They explained they were there to assess the property. I asked who sent them. They exchanged a glance. "Your son," one of them said. They walked through my home, taking notes, measuring rooms, opening closets, whispering quietly to each other. I followed them like a guest in my own house. In the bedroom, one of them mentioned safety concerns, rugs, stairs, the bathtub. "It would be better if you were somewhere with supervision," he said, not looking at me. Supervision. That word echoed in my head. By the time they left, my legs felt weak. That evening, my son came by. He did not knock. He used his key. I had forgotten he still had one. "We need to talk," he said, standing in the doorway. I asked him to sit. He did not. He told me they were arranging temporary housing. Somewhere easier, somewhere safer. I told him no. He told me this was for my own good. I told him to leave. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his face hardened in a way I had never seen before. "Mom," he said quietly, "if you make this difficult, you could lose a lot more than a house." That was the moment I understood. This was not concern. This was pressure. This was control. After he left, I locked the door and slid down against it, my back pressed to the wood, my hands trembling. I had not been served papers. I had not been forced out. But the message was clear. They were preparing to remove me. And unless I acted, the house I had built my life in would quietly stop being mine. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, the soft clicking sound marking each rotation. Every noise in the house felt louder than it should have. The refrigerator humming, the old clock ticking in the hallway. The house sounded alive, as if it knew it was being threatened. Sometime after 3 a.m, I got up. I wrapped a cardigan around my shoulders and went to the dining room. The papers were still spread across the table where I had left them. Bank statements, letters, that authorization document. I stared at it until the words blurred. That was when something finally shifted inside me. Fear gave way to clarity. If they were already moving this fast, then whatever they were planning had started long before I noticed. I pulled out my old laptop. It took several minutes to start. I had not used it much since my husband passed. Most of my life was on paper. That night, I was grateful for that habit. I logged into my bank accounts one by one. What I saw made my hands go cold. Transfers I did not remember approving. Small amounts at first. 500 here, 800 there, labeled as reimbursements, maintenance, assistance. Then larger ones. $10,000 moved out 6 weeks earlier. Another $15,000 2 months before that. The destination account was unfamiliar. I clicked deeper, tracing transaction histories the way my son had once shown me, patiently, years ago, when he insisted I learn basic online banking. The account holder name appeared. A limited liability company. I searched the name. It belonged to my daughter-in-law, not to her personally, to a company registered under her maiden name. My chest tightened so sharply I had to grip the edge of the table. I checked again. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it was coincidence. It was not. I pulled out my paper files, matching dates, the requests, the stories, the emergencies. Each large transfer matched a phone call. The time she said their landlord raised rent. The time she said they needed money for repairs. The time she said they were starting something new and needed help just for a little while. I realized then that the management company had not come first. The money had. This was not sudden. This was a plan. By sunrise, my dining table looked like a crime scene. Papers stacked, notes scribbled, dates circled. I made coffee and forgot to drink it. Mid-morning, my neighbor knocked. She had seen the men earlier that week. She asked if everything was all right. I told her no. I told her everything. Her face changed as I spoke, not shocked, angry. "This happened to my aunt," she said quietly, almost exactly like this. She told me the word I had been avoiding, exploitation. She told me to call a lawyer, not my son's lawyer, mine. I hesitated. Calling a lawyer felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. But I had already been pushed. I made the call. The attorney listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "You are in legal danger." He explained that the authorization I had signed could be used as leverage. That, combined with the money movement, it created a narrative they could shape if they wanted to. A narrative where I was confused, where I needed help, where someone else needed to step in. I asked him if they could force me out of my house. He said not immediately. Then he said not without a fight. That word again, fight. By the time I hung up, my hands were steady. Fear had burned itself out. What replaced it was something sharper. Resolve. That afternoon, I discovered the final piece. Buried deep in my email spam folder was a message I had missed weeks earlier, from a real estate office. It referenced a consultation request for my property, requested by my son. I stared at the screen for a long time. They had already asked how much my home was worth. They were not just moving money, they were positioning. That evening, I sat alone at the dining table as the sun went down, the same table where my family once laughed, where birthdays were celebrated, where my husband had carved the turkey every Thanksgiving. I realized something painful and undeniable. They were not worried about my safety. They were worried about access, and they had underestimated me. That night, I made copies of everything, every statement, every email, every document, because the truth was no longer just mine to know. It was my protection. I did not tell them what I had discovered. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I did not warn. I waited. 2 days later, my son called and said we needed to talk in person. His tone was firm, almost professional, like a meeting he had already scheduled in his mind. "We will come by this evening," he said. He did not ask if that was all right. I said nothing more than fine. The afternoon stretched endlessly. I cleaned the house slowly, deliberately, touching familiar objects as if committing them to memory. The framed photo of my husband by the hallway mirror, the faded rug in the living room, the chair by the window where I drank my morning tea. At 6:30, headlights washed over the front wall. They arrived together. He knocked once, short, controlled. I opened the door. They stepped inside as if they already belonged there. She sat on the sofa. He stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. I remained standing. "We are concerned," she began, her voice soft but rehearsed. "This situation has gotten out of hand." "Out of hand?" I asked. "What situation?" "Your resistance," my son said. "You are making things harder than they need to be." I took a breath and gestured for him to sit. He did not. I asked them directly why money had been transferred into her company. There it was, the first crack. Her eyes flicked to him. He frowned as if surprised by the question. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I repeated it, calmly, slowly. She laughed once, sharply. "You must be confused," she said. "Those were reimbursements, expenses we paid on your behalf." I asked her which expenses. She listed vague things, repairs, consulting, paperwork. I walked to the dining room and brought back a folder. I placed it on the table between us and opened it. Dates, amounts, account numbers. Silence filled the room. My son's face drained of color. "This is being taken out of context," he said. I asked him how context changed the fact that nearly $40,000 had been moved into a company I did not know existed. He rubbed his forehead. "You agreed to help us," he said. "This was just a cleaner way to manage things. Cleaner." She leaned forward. "We are family," she said. "It is all the same money eventually." Eventually. I felt something inside me go still. I told them I had spoken to a lawyer. That changed everything. My son's jaw tightened. "You did what?" I repeated it. Her voice sharpened. "You had no right." I asked her if she thought I had the right to know where my money was going. She stood up. "This is exactly what we were worried about," she said. "You are becoming paranoid, seeing problems where there are none." Paranoid. That word landed like a slap. My son finally sat down. He looked tired, smaller. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "we are trying to protect you. You are not as sharp as you used to be. You forget things. You get emotional." I asked him if that was why he contacted a real estate office about my house. The silence this time was heavy. He did not deny it. "We were just exploring options," he said. I asked him if those options included me. He did not answer. She crossed her arms. "You cannot live alone forever," she said. "You need supervision, structure, somewhere safe." I asked her if safe meant profitable. She snapped then. "Do you know how hard it is to build a life from nothing?" she said. "To struggle while someone else sits on a valuable asset doing nothing with it." I told her this house was not nothing. I told her it was my life. She laughed again, bitter this time. "You are being selfish," she said, "hoarding everything." That was when my son finally spoke up, louder now. "Enough," he said. "This is not productive." He turned to me. "If you do not cooperate," he said, "we will have to take further steps." I asked him what kind of steps. He hesitated, just long enough. "Legal ones." I nodded slowly. Then I told them I had copies of every transaction, every email, every document, that my lawyer had advised me to document everything going forward. Her confidence wavered. He stood up abruptly. "You are making a mistake," he said. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and realized something painful. He was not protecting me. He was protecting the plan. I opened the door. "Both of you need to leave," I said. He protested. She scoffed. I repeated myself. When they finally stepped outside, my son turned back. "This does not end here," he said quietly. I closed the door. I locked it. Then I leaned against it, my heart pounding, my hands steady. The confrontation was over. The war had just begun. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, slowly, relentlessly. 3 days after the confrontation, my lawyer called early in the morning. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made me sit down before he finished his first sentence. "We received additional records," he said, "things they did not expect us to see." He explained that once I revoked the authorization and froze certain accounts, automatic alerts were triggered. Those alerts revealed linked accounts, secondary transfers, a pattern. Not just money moved to her company. Money moved again after that, into personal accounts, into an account connected to my son alone. I closed my eyes as he spoke. This was not her manipulating him. This was them, together. He told me there was more. They had consulted with an attorney months earlier, not about helping me, about guardianship. I felt a tight pressure in my chest. They had asked questions about how quickly guardianship could be granted, about how cognitive decline could be demonstrated, about how property could be sold once authority was transferred. I asked him how he knew. Because the attorney they consulted later declined to represent them and documented the interaction. Those notes were now part of a record. I thanked him and ended the call. For a long time, I sat at the kitchen table without moving. I thought about every moment I had doubted myself, every time I had brushed off a comment, every time I had told myself I was being sensitive. The truth was heavier than anger. It was grief. That afternoon, my neighbor came by again. She did not knock. She rang the bell and waited. I let her in and handed her a glass of water I never drank. She listened as I told her everything I had learned. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "They planned this," she said quietly. I nodded. Saying it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. That evening, my son called. I did not answer. He left a message. "Mom," he said, his voice unsteady, "we need to clear some things up. Things are getting blown out of proportion." Blown out of proportion. I deleted the message. The next morning, a letter arrived from Adult Services. Someone had expressed concern about my well-being. Concern. The language was careful, neutral, professional, but I knew exactly where it came from. I called my lawyer immediately. "This is escalation," he said, "and it is clumsy." He explained that false reports often backfired, especially when financial records told a different story. He told me to cooperate fully, to welcome the visit. The caseworker arrived 2 days later. She was kind, observant, thorough. She asked me questions, simple ones, then harder ones. I answered all of them. She reviewed my documents, my accounts, my notes. She looked at the timeline. At the end of the visit, she sat back and folded her hands. "You are not the one at risk here," she said. I felt tears rise unexpectedly. She told me the report would reflect that. After she left, I stood in the doorway of my home and let the quiet settle around me. The truth was no longer something they could twist. It was documented, verified, seen, and for the first time since this began, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief, clarity. They had chosen this path, and now they would have to walk it without me. The collapse did not come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, almost politely. It began with silence. Days passed without calls, without messages, without surprise visits or thinly veiled threats. The quiet felt unnatural at first, like the stillness before a storm. I kept expecting my phone to ring, my doorbell to sound, some new maneuver to appear. Nothing did. Then the letters started arriving, not for me, for them. One afternoon, as I walked back from the mailbox, I noticed an envelope tucked into the corner of my son's old car windshield, the one he had left parked down the street during one of his visits and never retrieved. The return address was a bank. A week later, another envelope appeared, this one thicker, certified. I did not open them. I did not need to. My lawyer confirmed it 2 days later. Their accounts were frozen pending review. The management company terminated their involvement immediately after receiving notice of potential financial abuse. The real estate office withdrew all inquiries regarding my property, and the attorney who had quietly advised them earlier had formally distanced himself, citing ethical concerns. The structure they had built collapsed the moment it was exposed to light. My son came by alone one evening. He did not use his key this time. He knocked, softly. I waited before answering, long enough for him to knock again. When I opened the door, he looked different, smaller, older. He did not come in. "I am not here to argue," he said. His voice was low, stripped of confidence. I said nothing. "She left," he said after a pause. "When everything froze, when the money stopped, she said I failed her." I felt no satisfaction hearing it, just a dull ache. He told me his credit cards were canceled, that their accounts were under investigation, that people were asking questions he could not answer. I asked him one thing: "Did you plan to take my house?" He looked down. Yes, the word barely made a sound. He told me he thought it would be temporary, that they would manage things better, that I would be taken care of. Taken care of. I told him to stop. I told him that care does not require lies. It does not require secrecy. It does not require stripping someone of their autonomy. He nodded slowly, like someone finally hearing a language they had ignored. I told him he needed to leave. He asked if I would help him. "Not with money," he said quickly, "just with advice, support." I told him I could not. Not yet. When he left, I locked the door and stood there longer than necessary, listening to his footsteps fade. In the weeks that followed, I heard things through neighbors, through community whispers, through the kind of conversations people assume you are not part of. They downsized, quickly. She moved in with a friend. He took a temporary job far below what he once bragged about. Their image unraveled, the confidence, the entitlement, the certainty, all gone. One morning, as I watered the garden, I realized something surprising. I was no longer afraid. The collapse was complete, and it had not required me to raise my voice even once. The house feels different now, not emptier, not quieter, lighter. On most mornings, I sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the sun move across the floor the way it always has. The same light, the same walls, but something inside me has shifted. I used to think strength was about endurance, about holding on, about keeping peace at any cost. I was wrong. Strength, I have learned, is knowing when something sacred is being taken from you and saying no. I still think about my son. I always will. A mother never really stops. But I no longer confuse love with sacrifice that leaves me diminished. My home is still mine. My name is still on every document. My voice is still my own. The silence that once scared me now feels like protection. If you are listening to this and something feels familiar, trust that feeling. Do not dismiss it. Do not explain it away. Pay attention to what changes quietly before it becomes something loud and painful. You are allowed to protect yourself, even from family, especially from my family. If my story reaches you, wherever you are, thank you for listening. If it helped you feel less alone, share it with someone who might need it too. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about truth, boundaries, and reclaiming dignity, stay with me. You deserve safety, you deserve respect, and your life is still yours.